Joe, thanks for joining.
You're very welcome. Happy to be here.
How are you?
I'm doing great. Happy
Good,
New Year.
good. Happy New Year. I wanted to speak to you because Inside the Painter's Studio was really influential for me and a really important book for me. I read it when I was in grad school. This would have been like 2010 to 2013.
Hmm.
And so I think it came out not too long before that. There was like a sort of demystification there. And it was like really refreshing. It was really wonderful to read that and realize, oh, they're actually just people. These are artists. They have their own neuroses and issues, and but you're
Hmm.
getting it was really wonderful to get that glimpse. And also coming from, I went to grad school in the Midwest, basically in the middle of cornfield, so to get a sort of glimpse inside of an artist, I think most of the artists were New York based, right?
Mostly New York based, yeah.
At the time you were living in New York, right?
Yes.
Maybe you could just talk about how the book came about.
Yeah. So I think demystifying it is a great way to demystifying into the art world. Um, so I have two books Inside the Painter Studio, which was published in 2009 by Princeton Architectural Press, and then 2014. Was Inside the Artist Studio, which is sort of the follow-up. So the first book, what was really exciting about that was that like I never intended to write a book. So my own process was so initially it started off. I was in grad school at School of Visual Arts in New York. I was making these miniature sculptures of artists in their studios, picture like a dollhouse, artists in their studio, primarily working with historical artists as a figurative painter. And I initially started off with those with Barnett Newman, Clifford Still, Jackson Pollock, de Kooning, artists whose work I love. And so initially, in a way, making the sculptures and seeing the artists researching their creative process, I thought I'd become an abstract painter, which did not pan out. But when I realized what I was missing in the process was my own reference material and my own point of view, which my prior 10 years of paintings were paintings of everyday people, kind of from my own perspective. Um, I happened to, while doing that, visited a artist in a studio and realized, and then made a miniature sculpture and realized what I was missing was that firsthand experience. And that also came about when I was working on the Jackson Pollock sculpture, going out to the Springs, to his studio, walking in those footsteps. It made it more palpable and gave more of a sense of the scale, and you got a better sense of the history of the space versus kind of illustrating things from history books. With that said, then I got back and I realized I needed to do that. So I reached out to all these contemporary artists. The first artist studio that I went to was Michael Goldberg, who I knew through when I had gone prior to School of Visual Arts in undergrad school. And Michael's studio was down on the Bowery. It was an old gymnasium. He was a second generation abstract expressionist guy, a big guy, sort of a bear of a guy, kind of told these amazing stories. The studio used to belong to Mark Rothko, so he's showing me the crimson stains on the floor of Rothko, and it was just like amazing. And I literally went home and said like, shit, I wish I would have recorded that somehow. So I came up with a list of questions, and then just started reaching out to contemporary artists to go to their studios with the intent to make a miniature sculpture, but with the list of questions as the interview was a way to get in sort of a way in. Because you go to an artist studio, you've interviewed lots of artists, you look at their work, you think you have to say something smart. It's like very hard. And so with the questions I came up with, and I still pretty much use them today, it was really at that point I was older. I think I was probably 30. Um, Grad school or in grad school, and I wanted to know like, all right, how do you go from being a waiter or bartending or whatever job you have to actually making it as an artist? And so the questions were very sort of pragmatic. From where'd you grow up? How'd you get your first gallery? Um, how do you set up your studio? Do you listen to music when you work? How often do you clean your studio? To eventually like, what advice would you give to artists, et cetera. So I used the interview initially as a way in. And while I was talking to the artists in their studio, I could actually start seeing all the connections and how the work developed and the impact of the studio itself. Um, in relationship to the work, how that impacts the work. So eventually, I had all these interviews, and then I would, with my own process, photograph and document everything in order to go back to my own studio and make a miniature, sculpture of it. So I had all these documentary photographs as well. And so in 2006, I had a show at the time it was Plus Ultra Gallery, which included I forget how many, maybe it was like 16 small sculptures of painters painting tables, and then one big sculpture of Eric Fischl and April Gordon Studios. And so the table sculptures were all the same size. They're about 8.5 by 11. Um, and they were sculptures of only of painters painting tables, without the artist in there and without any finished work. And I wanted the viewer to look at the painting table as a form of portraiture. And what I decided to do at the time, which I thought made the show pretty cool, was since I had all these interviews, I actually then included the audio within in the work. And so each of the sculptures at the time it was dated had CD players, and so you could put the headphones on and listen to the artist talking about their creative process in their studio and how they set things up while looking at a miniature sculpture. Anyway, long story short, that show did really well. It got a lot of press, reviews, and really put me on my own career on a nice trajectory. Um, and then we started talking with some people that it just kind of naturally set itself up to be a book.
Well, I'm glad it was because I'm sure myself and a lot of other people benefit from reading that.
Yeah.
I can't think of anything else that really connected you with the artist in their studio in a
Well,
way
I
that
think,
book did.
yeah, you know what I think what happened, I remember I had a very close with, I was interviewing Inka Essenhigh early on, and Inka also went to School of Visual Arts, and at the time, I mean, she was young, but she had a really meteoric rise, showing at Mary Boone, and so I went to visit her husband, Steve Mumford, and her shared a studio space. So I interviewed Steve first, and he was great, and then I went next door to interview Inca, and she was kind of like standoffish at first, um, and it's like, oh, I don't have much time and so forth. I was like, okay. And so then I just started interviewing her. And at some point, something kind of clicked where she's like, are you an artist? I'm like, yeah. And really, I think the difference in my perspective, and I think this probably comes from your perspective as well, is it ends up being artist to artist interview, artist to artist conversations like this are very different than if a curator comes to your studio or a director or a gallery person or something. It's just a writer. It's a different dynamic, and so it ends up just being sort of talking shop. And I think as artists, we have insights into the creative process, but also just I think I personally just find artist studios so fascinating, you know. Um, so I think I think what luckily happened was my perspective as an artist interviewing other artists was hopefully just came across well, because actually I mean the book was really meant for people like yourself at grad school at the same time, which is when I started the project.
I still think about certain things in the book. I can't remember the artist that was saying that when he gets things right, when he's had not too much coffee, just enough coffee. Like it's just like who was the just finding the right level of where you're at your creative best.
Yes. Well, yeah, I didn't mean to cut you off, but I was thinking of what was so helpful for me. I also remember from the first book was, so one of the questions I would ask is like, can you just describe a typical day? Because we all had these at the time, being a younger person and not really you kind of had these ideas or sort of these myths of these artists. And so Will Cotton, I remember him saying is like, he got up at, 7, went out, got the newspaper, had some coffee, started, painting by 9, took lunch around noon, and wrapped up at 5. It was like, and said it was literally like a 9 to 5 day. And I was like, that like blew my mind. It's like, oh, it's just like a regular work day. Um, and so I think hearing those, and so I would always ask artists when I interviewed them and asked them, "Can you describe a typical day?" I would like be specific as possible. I want to know what you ate for breakfast, what time you get up, all the steps that it takes to go through, to again to sort of demystify the mystery behind it all.
We normally just see the work. We don't see all
Right.
this stuff behind it.
Yeah, the drudgery of the day-to-day stuff.
the day-to-day stuff. And
Mhm.
maybe you could describe a little bit about, you said that you saw the studio as kind of a self-portrait, like a portrait of the artist.
So I've been prior to making the sculptures, which would have been probably around is when I started those around 2000. Um, my prior paintings, I've always been interested in portraiture, and so I've been doing sort of literal portraits of people, um, and um, and so I'd always been interested in how do you make portraiture contemporary, and also then like what is a portrait, and so. At the time when I was in grad school and I started making these miniature sculptures, when I started looking at contemporary artists or so the way grad school is set up, it's these long hallways of maybe six artist studios on each side, so about 12 studios, and you kind of go down these little corridors and you're basically walking past these open spaces. And at night when no one is there, you could look through and just kind of look at each space and I saw it as a portrait, as their creative process was a portrait. And it also went back to when I had a job when I was in, I think my senior year in high school. My brother-in-law started a small business of cleaning offices. And so I would help him. And so we'd go into like a trucking company at night, which is maybe had like 30 cubicles and empty the garbage cans, clean the desk, empty ashtrays, and so forth. And I remember going through those little cubicles and you can't, well, I couldn't help but like make up like who is this person? Like you're looking at all their little photos, who's messy, who's neat, and you start making up, sort of these ideas as a portrait of who these people are without them there. And so when I was in grad school, that kind of the same thing happened, and then I started looking at the studio as a portrait, basically as an indirect portrait. And so it was way, yeah. So that's kind of how I see them, and then especially the painters painting tables. Especially with the painter not there, as a sort of a surrogate for the person. Yeah.
It's interesting. Yeah, you really get a sense of what they're like. Are they neat? Are they messy? And you did a Dana Schutz one, right?
Yep.
And it was like kind of a mess, right? Like it was like
Very.
kind of
So then
crazy.
then it's like, and then is their studio is what their studio looks like reflected in the work that they make. In her case, yes.
Yeah.
For most of them, I'd probably say yes. Yeah.
I assume somebody like Will Cotton was neater and things were a little more
Will Cotton
really
was
neat.
very, he worked with five colors. He
That's
had
amazing.
amazing, and he had just had a very small tray table that he rolled around. I worked on easels. He had just gotten some easels, and yeah, very. His studio at the time was an old loft building, so that necessarily wasn't it wasn't messy, but it was kind of a raw. The sheetrock walls were not necessarily painted, but his studio was very structured now that I think about it, and especially his process. Yeah, he just used five colors, which was amazing.
So red, yellow, blue,
Something
black,
like,
white.
yeah, yeah, I think like a deep
I
white.
remember reading that in the book and being like, "What? How could you
I know.
just use three? Like which ones? I wonder
I've always
what."
said I should try painting that way, and I never have.
I mean, I guess you could get really any color from those colors if he can do it because he's
You apparently
has
could.
a
I know. I was,
pretty full range of color.
yeah, exactly. I think I forget it was a warm red or something, and then a blue and a yellow, and
I wonder what blue, ultramarine maybe,
I don't know. I just read somewhere
phthalo,
someone was using a Prussian blue, but I'm not sure.
Prussian blue. Wow, that'd be interesting. Yeah, I
Yeah.
saw his last show in New York. I can't remember what gallery it was at, but those are intense. That's a lot going. I feel like it's those are kind of I'm not saying they're like junk food, but obviously it's quality painting. But I got a sense that at first I'm like, whoa, cool. And then I started looking more and more. And I really feel like there's a meta quality to those paintings where it's intentionally like you kind of feel like you've eaten too much candy or something, but there's like these reference.
Yes, I could see that. I could see that feeling. Yes, and in his case, probably literally is full of candy. Yeah.
Exactly. So where'd you grow up?
So I grew up in Long Island, just an hour outside New York City on in Seaford, which is on the South Shore, sandwiched between Wantagh and Massapequa. Went to School of Visual Arts in New York for undergrad school. Um, Moved my senior year after graduation. I moved up to Woodstock. I was working for this woman on the Lower East Side. She moved her shop. Ended up being I was fabricating work for her, metalwork, and then she moved her shop and kind of looked everywhere from the Delaware Water Gap to eventually ended up in Kingston, New York. And then I thought, well, Woodstock's 20 minutes, so I moved up with her. I worked for her for 3 years and then moved to Pennsylvania, where she moved her shop there for a half a year. And then moved back to New York at that point. And then just coincidentally, through a high school friend, got a job at School of Visual Arts and worked there 10 years in the continuing ed department, doing of different jobs as an academic advisor. The best job I had at the time, which was helpful, was I ran a summer residency program for painting, and then I developed a sculpture program for it. Um, and that program was helpful in that it was during the summer and I hired all these faculty and guest lecturers. So I at the time I hired Robert Storr, Jerry Saltz, where I met him, and then I started some the standard teachers who were doing it year after year. I thought was getting was this should be mixed up, and so then I would hire. I hired Steve Mumford to do it. I hired Tara Donovan, another time who were younger artists, and then at the same time, that's when I went to back to grad school to at SVA. And the nice thing with that is I was able to keep my job, though school was paid for. So I still kept my salary while going to grad school. And then, um, and then in grad school is when things started to take off with my work.
So it sounds like you knew a lot of these artists already before you interviewed them, or you knew some of them.
Yeah, I did, and I knew them probably from either working the summer program or through my undergraduate years at SVA, or or through my time just working through at the continuing ed department. Yeah, I knew a lot of artists.
I was going to ask it, was it difficult to get artists that you didn't know?
Yeah, kind of yes and no. So. I started off with some people I knew, and then I would ask them to make recommendations, which was helpful. And this is date myself, but at the time, this is pre-internet, and so you'd find one. I was just telling a story the other day. An artist named Lucio Pazzi. After I visited his studio, I was asking about another artist. He goes, and he's Italian. He goes, if you want to find someone, look them up in the phone book. And so we'd take the phone book and you could find all these artists that I thought were like huge stars. Julian Schnabel, Eric Fischler, they were all enlisted in the phone book. And so then I'd get their number or address and then mail them a packet with kind of what explained the project that I was doing. Um, as that work got known, was a lot, and then through email, it got a lot easier to reach out to these artists. And so there's been some artists who were not interested in doing it, but basically I'd sort of explain my project. I wanted to come by, do a studio visit with the idea to make a sculpture of their space, along with an interview. And most artists, artists like to talk about themselves. uh, so most of them are were fairly willing, which was nice. And then also it was also a little bit pre-internet. I remember um, also then like reaching out. I was always surprised when an artist would say yes, and then I'd go to their studio with my questions in hand, and then they'd open the door. I'm like, oh, that's you. Like I particularly remember that with Matthew Ritchie, who at the time in grad school. He was very big at the time, and you always think of these artists as these older people, and he was, fairly younger. And it's like, oh, you're just a regular person.
I'm sure it demystified not only the art, but the artist as well.
Yes.
As a person,
Yeah.
did seeing all this work, did it influence your work?
Yes. I remember not so much with let's see, maybe I think when I got back to painting. So I made the sculptures for so initially, I made the sculptures for a number of years, and then that's around when the market crashed, around 2009. My gallery I was with closed, and I wanted to get back to painting, and then I started hearing all the voices in my head from these other artists, and so I think that started to influence it in a way. But then. Um, maybe in a subtle way. Maybe like I have some little tricks. And speaking of Will Cotton, like I use this one of the questions I asked an artist is like what if there were any special tools or devices that they use. And so Will was like, yeah, I have a stick that I use for making, and I'm like, so I still use yardstick
What
like
did he use the stick for?
to make straight lines on a painting.
Mm.
So I have a whole bunch of yardsticks in my studio. I'm constantly making straight lines. I just hold the yardstick up to the painting and just make and just zip it right across.
So on a pragmatic level, on a physical level, you picked up some things, but also would
Yeah.
you say stylistically you became interested in certain ways of thinking or working as a result of talking to the artist?
Um, not. I'd probably say not that I could think of. Not within my own work. No.
Yeah.
I was pretty driven, pretty sort of specific with where I wanted my work to go and what I wanted it to be about. Um, I think it was probably more of sort of my ideas on how to survive, perseverance, persistence. That was a number of artists said that was sort of the key to success. Um, Even some of the things that Cordy, Ryman was talking about, you know, uh, um, make work for yourself. Have friends over, that more things that help me sustain. Think of how I could sustain a career as an artist and thinking in the long term.
Yeah. That's good. That's good.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
And
I
questioning what is success, also.
what is it? I think we're all after it. Everybody, we have an idea of what success is, but it's not, I don't think it's something that's over there.
No, and I think what I also learned when I worked at SVA, again, I worked there for about 10 years, is seeing kind of thinking like what is success. I've seen a lot of artists' careers. There's a lot you can't control. There's a lot you can control and a lot you can't control. Um, and seeing a lot of careers kind of go up and down. In fact, Gregory Amanoff in the first book talks about that and said, you have to think in the long term. A successful body of work could be followed by a non-successful body of work, and you just have to think in the long term. And now that I've been doing this long enough, I've seen that with my own career. I had a lot of success. I would say early on because I was older, but with those miniature sculptures, and then other bodies of work which were not as successful. Um, and now the current body work I'm successful again, and it's you, you don't know.
You never know. And I guess it's really not
You
up to
don't
you,
know.
right?
Yeah, I mean, when I was younger, I was like just waiting for like figurative art to be back in. There's things you can
Yeah.
control and things you like can't control.
Have you read Creative Act by Rick Rubin?
Oh, no, I've heard great things about the book though.
It's really
Yeah.
good. He's really good. He talks about the culture, if the culture is ready for you at that time. So
Yeah.
it's a lot of luck involved. There's a lot of incredible artists out there, but only a very small percentage get,
It's
a
it's
certain
a
kind of.
it's a lot of luck, and I was gonna mention this before. What happened to me was really sort of helped kick off my career as far as like career, meaning getting to work out there. When I was in grad school, Jerry Saltz was very helpful, and he started leaving notes in my studio. And I kind of knew him because he had worked. Yeah, I had hired him to lecture when I was running the summer program. Um, and then on one sort of random day called me and said, there's a spot at PS1. If you can get your work over there by the weekend, you could have a show. And so it was me, Dana Schutz, who was at grad school at Columbia at the time, and another artist named Brock Enright, I believe was his name. We all showed up with our work and kind of installed it, and then there was an opening at PS1, and then that show got reviewed, and I sold some work, um, and that started getting things going. And so a lot of it is like just random, random things like that happen.
You have to be there for it though, right?
You have to be there for it, and you have to have the work for it. Yep.
Yeah, exactly. So what in 2009 you mentioned that what happened when the market crashed?
So 2009, a lot of galleries, well, kind of, I guess it's similar to what's maybe it's different than what's going on now. I'm more optimistic about the art world right now than I think than some people might be. But 2009, the stock market crashed and galleries, a lot of galleries started closing. And collectors weren't buying work. A lot of people lost money. So the art world kind of really constricted. Um, and kind of in a weird way, for me as an artist, it was kind of freeing in that I started making a new body of work of big paintings. And I kind of thought like, well, they're not gonna, there's no place to show them and there's no place to sell them. No one's gonna buy them right now, so I can kind of do whatever I want. And so I just started making these works sort of for myself that were sort of another project. But so with the but a lot of the galleries a lot of galleries closed. Yeah, it was not a great time.
So did that change your, I guess, trajectory in the art world?
Um, didn't I wouldn't say it changed my trajectory, and it ended up it kind of put things on a pause for a while, probably for a lot of people. Uh, and yeah, no, I wasn't um any work I'd sold, yeah, there wasn't any sort of venues to necessarily show. I remember sort of looking around for other galleries, but then my work was changing. So I started I just started making new bodies of work with the hopes that, like we all do, like someone will see it at some point.
Were you teaching at that point?
No. So I was fortunate, maybe unfortunate enough. So in 2003, 2004, I started showing at Plus Ultra Gallery, which at the time initially opened up in Williamsburg. And the way I got that gallery is I was living in Williamsburg and they were on the ground floor. And I remember hearing, banging and all that stuff. And then one day a gallery opened and I was coming home from grad school. I had taken some photographs of my work that I got developed at the, like literally like 4x6 prints developed at the Walmart or the Walgreens. I came home, I went into the space, I said, just to say hi. They're like, oh, I live upstairs. And they're like, what do you do? I'm like, oh, I'm in grad school, I'm an artist. I showed them the pictures, little bit of 4x6s, and they're like, oh, these are great. We should blow these up and do a show. I'm like, okay. So that kind of happened organically, just like that.
So you were showing pretty consistently in the 2000s.
Yes. So I had a show plus Ultra, and then the PS1 thing happened at the same time. So I got a review in the Brooklyn Rail, which was of both, I believe it was both shows. And so that kind of started things going. And then I started I had another show at Plus Ultra, and then 2006 I had the show in Plus Ultra when they had moved to Chelsea, and that was with the painters painting tables. And so I know where I was going. So at 2000, so somewhere around there, I ended up quitting my job at SVA. And we had moved to Connecticut. We had moved to Norwalk, Connecticut. Um, and when we moved, then my wife got pregnant, and so I just quit my job, and basically probably for about 15 years, didn't do anything except be a studio artist. And that all sounds great until, and it's kind of this fantasy we have of like would be everyone's dream, right? After a while, so then from Norwalk, Connecticut, I moved up to Simsbury, Connecticut, further up, and I started getting involved in the University of Hartford as an adjunct. But being in the studio is great, but it's also a little bit lonely. And I'm like a social person, and actually, when I was at School of Visual Arts working there, I really loved running the summer program. I loved hiring artists. I loved kind of working on the programming and building things. And so once I started getting involved in the University of Hartford, I kind of realized I missed some interaction, and so that got me into teaching. So that's when I started adjuncting teaching at that point.
I mean, we're such social creatures, even artists. I mean, you can enjoy solitude, but you still need the connection, right?
Yeah, and I think I've been lucky. I've been lucky with the work I've been doing, which involves other artists, that it allows me to go kind of similar to this podcast, right? I get, and I think Cordy mentioned this. You get you get kind of inspired by talking to other artists or meeting other artists or going to their studios. So that would feed my soul, and it's actually still feeds my soul to be able to go to another artist studio and engage with them, and then come back to my own studio and then just focus on the work. And you kind of still have their voices in your heads. But I think so. I like that. I like that you kind of have the combination. At least I do, like, of sort of that social aspect, and then the solitary time and to be in the studio.
The best. Truly, it's such a privilege
Yeah.
to be able to connect with people in this way. And I have a lot of respect for you doing it, pre-internet, looking people up in the phone book and just and
I feel very lucky in that. Like I hadn't planned any of this stuff. It's like this is just something that I was interested in. Was other initially it started off, with other, well, always with people, but then other artists, and then reaching out and then doing the interviews with them, and then making the sculptures of the artist studios, and then a lot of these relationships then became friends with a lot of these people now I've known over the years. Uh, and so that's been a big blessing. And yeah, and even the book, like I never intended to write a book. It just kind of came out through the process.
I'm glad you did because at that time, I think there was a lot of, I think there was this, I would have read it in like 2010, 2011. There still wasn't a whole lot of, I mean, there was no social media at
Yeah.
that time. Internet was, I wouldn't say it was read only. It was still basically web one,
Hmm.
like you couldn't really interact with it too much. And so I mean, there were blogs and stuff, but I think there's a few like painters blogs at that point, but it was nice just to you could tell it was a direct experience of the artist and their experience. And
Yeah.
you could really tap into that.
Well,
And
yeah, and you couldn't even like now if you research an artist, there's probably the interview on YouTube someplace, or there's there's like videos of them talking about their work, where at the time there wasn't. And so I didn't even know what they looked like some of the times.
I'm sure when you stepped into the studio is a complete shock sometimes as
It,
to the
it It was often, well, this is going to sound corny, but it was like the scene in Willy Wonka, the original one, where they come out to the Wonka land, and it's like just all the amazement of everything that's there, you know. You know what artist studios. I didn't grow up. I had it when, well, okay. When I had when I was in undergraduate school, I had a job working for an artist named Peter Dean, who had a loft on Spring Street and the Bowery. And I worked maybe I think one day a week for him, and I'd either stretching canvas, labeling slides, etc. And he was an abstract, he was a sort of more of a German expressionist style painter. Um, and he'd be on his side of the loft, listening to KCR jazz, and I'd be on the other side working at rabbit skin glue. And it was really as if it was like 1940. It was like there was nothing. It brought me back to like another time. And
so
so
you cut up for a second there. I'm sorry. Yeah, you said it was like 19.
it felt like it was like 1940 or 1950 or something. And the smell of the rabbit skin glue and the old loft and all these crazy paintings that were around. Um, and he worked with very thick paint, and so it's like his painting table is covered in his clothes are covered in paint. And so years later, when I started interviewing artists, I think that connection of being in the artist studio when I was younger. Was joyful, and so it kind of brings that back when you go to going to contemporary artist studios, and meeting them and basically seeing behind the curtain. How do they, and I would often tell them, if I'm going to their studio, I'm like, don't clean up. I want it to look as if you like just got up and got like a cup of coffee. Wear whatever clothes you wear in a studio. I want it to be as if I'm not even there, and I'm just kind of stepping into the scene.
It really is like stepping into another dimension. I
Yeah.
I met Paul Mogensen, I think I mentioned before, through Karma. I was a freelancer there back in like 2016, 2017. He was one of the first people on the podcast actually. Going to his studio, he's had this same loft on Mercer Street since the 70s. And it's time portal, and you see, but really
Hmm.
one thing I want to talk about is that you really get a sense of the context of his work being in the studio in a way that you wouldn't otherwise. He's has all these books, history books and books on aerodynamics and engineering, all this stuff. And then you look at the paintings, you're like, oh, this is interesting. They're sort of minimalist, basic geometric designs, but you see them differently. You see where it's coming from.
Completely. In fact, again, at Matthew Ritchie's studio, he literally had on his desk like books on physics and chemistry and neuroscience and all this other stuff, which is clearly in the work. Um, and then even Will Cotton, yeah, looking at the books that they have around um, is always interesting. And then I like kind of peering into the corners of what artists have in the studios and kind of seeing things that they even kind of forget that they've had. Um, uh, um, is always kind of that's where my sort of my not my perception. Those are the things that I look for is the things that have been around probably forever that they don't even know even there anymore.
The subconscious influences
Yeah,
almost.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah, and like little things that might be meaningful for them. Yeah.
What were some surprising things you would see in an artist studio?
Ooh. The first thing I remember, it just made me think of Gregory Amanoff had a hatchet, um, and he talked about that. He was my thesis advisor when I was at School of Visual Arts. I think he's terrific. Uh, and so I'm like, why do you have a hatchet? He's like, he had it since he was a Boy Scout, and it was paint covered in the studio, and so he said sometimes it would, he'd attack a painting if it wasn't going the right way. Um, uh, Let me think if I can't think of anything offhand. Maybe it wasn't kind of maybe more sometimes like some of the things like the processes that they worked in. Painter studios are very different than sculptor studios. Um, uh, I can't think of anything specific offhand. I'd probably have to look at my list of artists and kind of think about it.
Would you look at their books and be sometimes surprised at what they were looking at, for example?
No, I don't think so. I would I know a few artists I would ask them of like was it there an early artwork that that they made that had gotten some recognition like when they were younger, right? So as artists, I did something in nursery school, right, that I got recognition for at art, and so and then you kind of grow up. Most of us do probably, in art class, and you're like the school sort of artists, right? Um, so I remember Tom Otterness was talking about this lion that he made in the third grade, and he was like he painted it with all these sort of drips and stains, and he's like, oh, and I still have it. Here it is. And I don't know, Tom's like 70, and he grabs it off the shelf, this like ceramic lion that he has that he's had since the third grade, um, which I thought was pretty cool that he still has that. That was like meaningful to him. So I don't know if it's again necessarily. I think probably like small little things. Kind of, no, I was just gonna say, kind of maybe more process stuff.
How they work, if it's
How they
messy, it's
work. Like Ross
clean.
Bleckner, makes his own paintings. Philip Taff builds his own. He does a lot of, print works with prints, and so he would like sort of build his own felt sort of French curve shapes, things that then he would stamp onto his paintings. Um, kind of more stuff like that.
So much of what we do, I think more than we realize, is contextual. You grew up in a certain background, from a certain socioeconomic place, and you have these opportunities or whatever it is that's based on the context. So I think and a painting is really to see just that painting removed or sculpture removed from the context. I get a sense that you're really getting a fuller picture of the work when you really explore the place in which it's made.
Okay. one of the eye-opening ones was Ursula von Riedigsvard's sculptures. I hadn't considered I didn't really understand consider like how they were made, and she's made some huge gigantic sculptures and some in her studio, and they're literally made out of 4x4 strips of cedar. And so she starts on the floor with kind of a shape and then just builds them up layer by layer. And then looking back at the work, you could see that grid system, if you look at it head on, of basically those, 4x4 grids as the sculpture builds up. And it's such a simple process, though her work is incredibly elaborate. So that was surprising. Then she'll kind of build layer by layer, not kind of maybe having idea where the work is going, but then make some marks on the wood, and then her assistant will use a circular saw and just kind of cut and nip at them, and then she just builds it up, step by step.
Amazing. But you never know that
You would never know that.
by
No, they look
looking.
like
Yeah.
they're just or one organic. It just kind of came into being. Yeah,
As it should, right? I think it
as
was,
it should.
yeah. I always think of Robert Ryman saying that this is a little different, but he was talking about a work not looking like it would, like you can't look like you suffered making it. It has to look like it was easy, even if it wasn't.
Yeah.
Um,
Um, yeah, I'm thinking who else? Fred Tomaselli, whose work I love. Like how do you make those? And he just builds them up. He has, all these cutout images, and he sits basically the work is flat, and then he has a bridge that he lies on and just places everything on the painting, and then puts a layer of the resin over it, paints some more, does some other layer and more resin. And yeah, you just kind of you see these works in museums and galleries, and they kind of feel like they just kind of came out full form. But the process, yeah, how they're built up is really interesting.
so you started teaching Connecticut, and you're in Sarasota, Florida, right?
Yep, yep.
You're teaching at the Ringling College.
So the department chair of fine arts and visual studies and photography at Ringling College of Art and Design. Yep.
Good
So that
school.
brought me down here. Yeah.
Yeah, cool, cool. Yeah, I think wasn't Werner Herzog like a guest lecturer there for a while?
Um, Possibly.
This is what I heard. My friend, do you know George Carr?
I don't know George, though. I have George's poster up in our fine art studio. So he was a trustee scholar, I believe, probably I think I'm gonna have to guess maybe 2012.
Yeah.
It was before my time. But last year to inspire the kids, every year we have this thing called the trustee scholar where two students are nominated, and it's a pretty big honor. And I believe George was one of them, and so I put posters up in our studios area with going far back. Probably he might have been the earliest I can kind of get where they would take these sort of nice, glamour shots of the artists, the students at the time. So it's trying to build a history. Yeah,
That's cool.
yeah.
How
So
do
I
you,
don't
how do
know,
you,
but I've heard a lot of great things about him.
indeed. How do you find Florida?
Um, it's kind of got its ups and downs. I grew up in the Northeast. Our family is still there. I still go to New York probably about every 2 months or so, to help kind of keep in touch. It's changed over the year, even though I've been here 9 years now, and it's changed. It's gotten a lot more conservative. But then in art school, so we don't see as much. But it's definitely changed politically a lot in the short time I've been here.
Yeah,
So that's an issue.
for sure. I
Yeah.
did get the chance to go a few years ago to, I had some friends that got married in Sarasota. So I went to the Ringling, and it is an interesting, they have some good stuff, the museum. Um,
The Ringling Museum has some
yeah.
great stuff, and I'm very involved with the Sarasota Art Museum, which is part of Ringling College. So not to get confused, there's Ringling College of Art and Design has nothing to do with the Ringling Museum,
Hmm.
but the Ringling family was here, so a lot of things are named Ringling. And then the Sarasota Art Museum was opening. What got me down here was the was under construction, and through my gallerist and friend Cristin Tierney, her parents lived down here. Her friend at the time, Anne Marie Russell, was building out the Sarasota Art Museum, And so the idea was that the fine arts program would work. They were looking for a new department head that could work with the museum and get the museum, work with the museum and build up the department at the same time. So that's what I came down for. And so I'm very involved with the Sarasota Art Museum, which is a contemporary. It's a non-collecting museum, so it's a Kunsthal style, and it's just contemporary art. Where the Ringling Museum is a historical museum, a lot of Rubens and stuff like that. They show contemporary art as well, but different. So it's nice having both of those museums over here. Yeah.
So when you say it's a they don't purchase art, they have a permanent collection, that's it?
They don't have the Sarasota Art Museum does not have a permanent collection or purchase art. So it's just rotating
Oh,
exhibitions.
cool. I
Yeah.
see. So it's all generally it's contemporary artists.
It's all contemporary artists.
Yeah.
Yep.
If I make it down to Sarasota again, I'll have to check that out. Was it the Winter Mansion of the Ringlings that's connected to the museum? Is it
That's at the
connected?
Ringling Museum. Yep.
That's
That's connected
yeah.
to the Ringling Museum. Yep.
That's such an
It's crazy.
interesting,
Yeah. And then
so
they also have
crazy.
this the Circus Museum
We went
there
there
as
too.
well, which is
Yeah,
which is pretty cool. Yeah.
it is cool.
Yeah, we've had some really great shows at the Sarasota Art Museum. Judy Pfaff did a really amazing show a couple years ago. They opened up, I think, with a Vic Muniz show, and then Shanae Shape had a show. I was fortunate to have a show there last year. Um, Larry Fink's photography was there, so they've had some excellent shows.
And it seems like a
Yeah,
nice counterbalance to the sort of historical
yeah,
museum. Yeah,
it is.
yeah, that's cool. It was Sarasota. Is it that the Ringling fan? Like, it seems like there's a lot of people from the East Coast that live in Sarasota.
Sarasota, so I think what's the positive thing I'd say that's changed about Sarasota again in sort of the short time I've been here, and it felt like initially it was compared to the East Coast. So my parents, the East Coast is a lot of New Yorkers and people from Boston and so forth, right? The I-95 corridor. Sarasota has I-75, which goes through Michigan, Chicago, Kentucky, Ohio, places like that. So there's a lot more Midwesterners lived here.
Hmm.
Though over the years, especially being involved with the Sarasota Art Museum, there's been more people who are connected to New York, which is nice. And so it's kind of a mix of people from Detroit, Michigan, who are art collectors, and now more New Yorkers. Yeah, obviously, they have places in both. And the other advantage that Sarasota has is that it is a very wealthy community, and so especially for the Sarasota, I think for actually both museums, and not only for the museums but also for the arts in general. There's the Opera House, there's a symphony, there's a lot of cultural activities here, and so it gets a lot of support from the community.
What kind of an art
Yeah.
scene is there?
The art scene is a little quieter than expected. So yeah, there's really not much. There's like sort of a small local scene, um, uh, but not much more than that. There's a lot of support, but most of those probably would say would be around the museums. It's
That makes
hard
sense.
to. There were a couple of galleries here when I first got here, but it's hard, I think, for them to survive.
That makes sense. You would need to go to New York every couple of months to stay connected like that.
Yes. Yeah, that
Yeah,
fills my soul.
it's really about the connection. It's such a wonderful. It's the best place. I mean, not that you can't be connected wherever you are, but I think I'm sure you experience this when you're in New York. You can tap into the energy, the creative energy of the place. You don't even have to go out. You're just in your studio and you feel that energy.
You do, and I grew up there, so I know the city very well, and when I go, and I'll just go for maybe 2, 3 days, or maybe 2 nights. So short little trips, but I'll schedule a lot, and I'll maybe do a studio visit. I go to my gallery. I go to all the openings when my gallery will have an opening, and yeah, or reach out to friends, so go to museums, galleries, kind of see all the shows. So I pack in a lot over a short time. Um, but um, but yeah, I have to do that. It's important. It's important just for my soul, but also it's important to keep up those relationships.
Do you have any upcoming shows in New York?
I do not. So I show with Cristin Tierney Gallery. And I've been with Cristin since the beginning. And so how I met Cristin was when I moved to Norwalk, Connecticut. Cristin lived in Stamford, Connecticut, and a mutual friend, still one of my dearest friends, who I knew from School of Visual Arts, an art historian, was like, "Oh, you got to go meet Cristin. You should meet Cristin. She's in the next town over." So eventually, we met and we hit it off, and so we were friends for about 10 years before she opened the gallery. And she was is still an art advisor as well. And so then she opened the gallery, and the gallery now has been open for 15 years and just moved. Initially, they were in Chelsea, then the Lower East Side, and just moved to Walker Street in Tribeca. So when I go to New York, I'll go see Cristin and the staff, who I've known for a long time. I was just in a show there. They had the 15th anniversary show that opened in September, and then there was just a really great Judy Pfaff show, um, and then nothing scheduled for right now. Though I do have a show that's up. It's the last weekend up at the New Britain Museum in Connecticut, which is my paintings, contemplating Vermeer, which are paintings initially based off the Vermeer exhibition that was at the Rijksmuseum a few years ago.
After inside the painter studio, you're making the paintings of the artist's tables and then the artist studios and sorry, the sculptures. You were making the sculptures of the artist tables and where did that go from there? What
Yeah. So I was making the sculptures and works based on artist studios, and then the recession hit, and then I did a series of large scale paintings based on this book called The Judgment of Paris, which was about the rise of the Impressionists in Paris between 1863 and 1873. I had a show with those paintings, and then I did a series of small scale paintings of films based about films about artists. And I had a show with those paintings. And then I did another book inside the artist studio. And so then I got back into making some paintings and sculptures of artist studios. Then I moved here, didn't do anything for a year. And just before moving here, I kind of had some transition paintings where I started. My work has always been about, or one component of my work has been about contemplation. And so when I would even make sculptures or paintings of artists, one of the questions I would literally ask them is when you're in your studio contemplating, how do you sit or stand? And then they would kind of get in their pose. And then I would photograph them in the round and then make sculptures of them. So all my sculptures primarily depict the artists if they are in a studio. It's not necessarily them working, but them contemplating their work. So then years later, and I look at that moment of contemplation where it looks like that's kind of the romantic notion of the artist, kind of like, when I was young, you smoke cigarettes and kind of sitting back in your chair and like kind of like looking at a painting. Um, but it seems like that moment of when you're working, not or you're doing sort of least amount of work is really when you're working the hardest, and you're kind of making those aesthetic judgments, looking at a painting, what it needs, saying most likely a painting. Does it need this to move something over this much, et cetera? And so once I started having more museum shows, I became more conscious of how people see work in museums and galleries. And they always say, I think the average person looks at artwork for about 15 seconds, right? And so looking at museums, I started to be more aware of the people that were really deeply engaged with works, and not just kind of passing through or taking selfies. And I remember at the Met one time I passed this woman who was looking at a Rembrandt self-portrait, and I was kind of behind her looking at that for a little while, and then I left, and I probably came back about 20 minutes left, and she was still there, engaged with that painting, so very deeply engaged. So from that, I started making paintings of people contemplating work in museums and galleries. Um, so that's pretty much what I've been doing for the last 8 or 9 years now.
what do you think is happening there when somebody's contemplating a painting that deeply?
Um, I think it probably depends on the person, and what they're getting out of it. I know. When I was in one of my studios in Connecticut, I didn't share, within the same building complex, was a really great artist named Carrie Smith. And Carrie's a hard edge sort of abstract painter. Um, and I remember, it was so enjoyable. It was like we could sit in a studio and for it seemed like hours, just like agonize over like, like can should like this little, line be shifted over like a quarter inch or not, and how that would completely change the composition. And it's like those small little micro sort of decisions that you're making. So a lot of it could just be it depends on kind of the work. But say if it's a painting, it could be looking at the surface, looking at the composition. If it's a portrait, say in the case of the Rembrandt, probably feeling the presence and the gazing into the face of Rembrandt. Um, I guess it's probably different for everyone and what grabs them.
I've been thinking about that a lot in terms of durability and time and how much time one devotes to a painting. And if the time you put into a painting comes out on the other end in the form of a viewer looking at it for longer. Last summer, I went to Bruges and Ghent,
Oh, yeah.
and it was just amazing. I mean, just that stuff is the probably the slowest painting there is. And it's so wonderful. And I could sit there for 15, 20 minutes. It's not a problem, and then come back to it and stare at it for another 5 or 10 minute time. 5 minutes with a painting is a really long time
Yes.
I mean, comparatively, compared to most, if you say, 60, if 15 seconds is the average.
Yeah.
And I was wondering what that is. Like, why are you compelled to look at them for longer?
I don't know. I've sort of changed my viewing habits where when I go to museums and stuff, I kind of meander more, or kind of allow myself to meander and kind of just stop in front of something that'll grab me, instead of trying to like see every, say if there's like well, I'm just thinking of like the what was up there a lot recently, like the Hopper show that was at the Whitney a few years ago. It was a lot of paintings, and so or even the Amy Sherrill show that was just up, like, so it's hard to engage with every single one equally. So kind of just to kind of walk through and see which ones, something will grab you, and then and really spend more time with that, and really kind of look at, artists always kind of probably look at more things how they were constructed. Um, I don't know if I'm necessarily looking at content per se, but more like the painting quality, and even thinking of like your work. A lot going on, right? And all those the different variations of colors and the structures that are going on. Like you could probably get, lost in those for a long time.
I hope
And
so.
I think what I appreciate about your work, and kind of also find myself, um, I didn't think about this at the time, but retrospectively thinking of the artists that I chose to work with for my books. Um, they're kind of like maximalists. There's like a lot of work that feels, or literally does, or feels like a time was invested in it. So not something that someone could just sort of dash off.
Absolutely.
There's
Yeah.
something about that amount of time that I feel. And someone once pointed this, because I grew up in Long Island with sort of a working class family. Like you have to put time in it to give it value.
I think I have a similar view on it. And I grew up in the Midwest and kind of like the suburb of Chicago. And I think that, if you weren't introduced to minimalism or, things that of that nature, you always think that more information is better and more complex is better and more realism is like that's kind of like the goal. But it's interesting that I think that's I keep coming back to the Northern Masters, Van Eyck and Memling and so forth, because there's something happening there where it's flat but incredibly richly detailed. They weren't interested in space in the same way. It's not the theatrical space of a later Renaissance painting. It's almost digital in a sense. Like you're seeing the whole thing at once.
Hmm.
I don't know how to describe
Yeah.
that. The current iteration of your work, you're still in the contemplation series.
Yes. So making paintings of people contemplating work in museums and galleries, pretty much, yes.
Do you take a photo of somebody contemplating a painting and then are you working from photos?
So I work from photos. So what I'll do is I kind of sort of have some rules for myself. So well, let's see. So I was just in New York, and so there was the what did I see? The Joan Mitchell show.
Oh, it's Werner?
As Werner was very
Yeah.
good, and so and then there was the Jennifer Packer show at Sycamore. Great paintings, and then very engaged audiences or art world attendees, right? So I'm there looking at the paintings, but then I'm watching. You can't help watch people look at the work, and especially in the winter is great because of all the coats and the scarves and the hats. There's a lot, and the boots. There's bags. There's lots of great clothes. So so I'll be looking at the show. I know the spaces, so then I'm kind of looking at what if I want to make a painting of those exhibitions, what paintings would work well. And then I'm following people around, taking pictures of them, looking at the work, and they have no clue that I'm doing it because they're engaged with the work, and it's a public space, and people are taking pictures all the time. And so, um, and then I'll come back to my own studio, and then I'll kind of sort of figure out what image or images I want to depict, what's sort of the stage, say, and then I have all the separate images of the people, and I'll start kind of cutting and pasting them around within the to create a good composition. So a lot of it has to do with so my rule is that the people in the paintings had to be at that show, not necessarily maybe in front of that painting at that particular time, but had to be at that show because I'm sort of following them around. And so so then once I figure out the composition, um, uh, and I project the image onto my studio wall, and I want the figures that these are small scale paintings, and so I want the figures within the paintings are somewhere around 7 or 8 inches. Is sort of my rule. So once that feels comfortable, then I will sort of while it's projected measure what that the frame will be, and then these are paintings on linen, but they're mounted on MDF board, and so then I'll basically cut the wood and then stretch the linen over that. But since it's the scale or the size of the paintings are based on the figures and not necessarily the scene, so a lot of the paintings are all sort of there's no like set size. They could be 13 and 3/4 by 12 and a half, or 15 and an eighth by 17. But and it's really I think I at least for me like that eighth of an inch or a quarter of an inch really makes a big difference because it's really all about it's about the how the figures are in that space in relationship to the space itself and the room, and it's kind of all those sort of formal qualities. So I think any figurative painter will tell you, well, I think they'll probably say is they're really sort of an abstractionist, So I think that's for me at some point, even though obviously these are paintings about people looking at art, it at some point it's not that becomes irrelevant, and it's about a good composition and moving people around to create a rhythm and a flow.
It's not arbitrary.
It's not
All these
arbitrary at
elements.
all. Hmm.
Yeah, I like that. And I think it will come through looking at your paintings. You don't have to have a clear answer for this necessarily, but what do you hope somebody might come away with after seeing your work?
Um, from sort of the artistic side of me, or the creative side, would and Dan Cameron mentioned this about the work, which I appreciated. It was that how did he say it? It was about that he sees the work as the paintings say the painting with the artwork within the image is the anchor for how the figures are placed around them or something like that. So sort of the formal qualities. Uh, and the scale is really this that small intimate scale is really important for these works. So those are very conscious decisions. So I hope they just find it as a pleasing composition. Um, then there's also sort of this side of it as a painter, even though they're not photorealist paintings at all. They could look like photorealism if you had sort of an image of them, but once I have the composition, what that does, it allows me then the freedom when I go to paint it. Occasionally I'll move some things around, but then I could just focus on the painting. I'm not necessarily moving people around or making. Sometimes I will, but I'm not drastically changing the composition once I have it. And so then I could just and so in person, if you look up close, I think there are some nice painterly moments. I love color, so they're probably, they're a little oversaturated, but and for me then the fun part is then replicating everything from a Marilyn Minter painting to Barclay Hendricks painting to an Olympia to a Yo-Yo Kusama sculpture to you know floors and textures and clothes. All that stuff is kind of fun.
I was just about to ask. That seems like the best part is to get to paint like Joan Mitchell.
Yeah, and so from that, actually, I do learn a lot about those works. So even like painting a Joan Mitchell or Joan Snyder, uh, or all those Vermeers that I painted. There's one thing when you're in a gallery or a museum, right, and you're looking at the work, and you're engaged with it in person. Um, and that's one way to see it. And I really try to focus on that when I'm there. But then when it goes to painting it, since I'm not just sort of these paintings take time, so you're deeply then engaged with if I'm replicating a painting for a while, and so you really start to see you can't just kind of slap on the paint. It depends on the painting, say that you're replicating. Um, there is like a depth and a you have to build up to kind of get that history of the painting to make it you want to make it I'm trying to at least make it they're not again there's not photorealist paintings replicas but I want them to make it convincing.
You have to step into the shoes of that painter.
Yeah,
It's a
yeah.
really, it seems like a really fun journey.
It really is. Yeah, I feel again, and I when I started these paintings, I remember thinking when I first started these, I'm like, this is like the stupidest idea. It's like it seems so obvious, like people looking at artwork. But it's become sort of my own thing, and I feel very lucky to sort of fallen into it. It's fun the way to engage and paint people, and also then to go out and see artworks, the research that's involved in within my own work, and it gives me a deeper understanding of the artists again when I'm replicating their works. Yeah,
That's
and I
good.
painted Bruegels and as well, and those were I thought they'd be well. I was going to say I thought it'd be a little harder. uh, but I'm just looking at it like I love Max Beckman and like there's like the Max one of his portraits. Like you really kind of get into the head of those artists, or not the head of those artists, but like
Yeah.
to engage for the amount of time it makes that to make a painting with that artwork is it's just another level of seeing it.
I mean, I understand why people go to museums and paint paintings. I don't see people doing that much anymore. I assume they still do. They set up with an
To
easel
paint
and
from
put it.
life.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was so I just did a painting of so I was just at the Met I guess last spring to look at those to look at some Vermeers and there were people painting from life. So I made a
Mm.
painting of a woman painting the Vermeer.
Oh,
Yeah.
cool. That's fun.
So I was making these Vermeer paintings, and when in the summer, so I had a few more to kind of just finish up the series, and so I was working on them, and it felt a little bit of sort of a struggle of kind of just going through the process, and then I felt like my works like it seemed like my work felt like trite with all the political upheaval and everything that's going on in the world, of making paintings of whatever of like other people's paintings, and then. And so I was kind of like questioning that. And then I went and saw the Anselm Kiefer show in St. Louis. And that's all about life and death and transformation, like literal physical transformation. And so that I came home, like that literally was helpful for me. I'm like, I could actually address sort of these bigger issues by focusing on by replicating Anselm Kiefer paintings and taking a deep dive into Anselm Kiefer. But I think there's something Yeah, with all whatever, with all the politics and everything that's going on in the world, it's such a that there has to be a deeper, a bigger meaning. And I was feeling that, at least with my own work, by replicating some other works that might feel a little more sort of trite. I found it then through looking through these other artists, and like you're doing it, yeah, through the enunciation. Yeah.
And it's never been more important. I think when it's a time of great change and a lot of upheaval and a lot of political uncertainty, I think art is more important than ever.
Yes. Yes.
And I really enjoy that you tapped into it, coming to that through looking at art, that you sort of were able to come back to the meaning.
I was
Yeah.
questioning it, like how I was very aware. I was in a funk. I'm like, what? I thought it literally seemed like what I was doing was kind of seemed pointless. And where just a few short months ago, it seemed like the most pointless at all. And then, yeah, through other artists' work, like through your other artists' versions of the Enunciation, kind of looking at that, yeah, the same way. So it was helpful for me through another artist to kind of see that, yeah.
It's really nice to find yourself in a continuum. We're not trying to reinvent something. You have your own voice, your unique perspective, but you're in a lineage.
Yeah. Oh, completely. You're in a complete history. Yeah. And that's what, I find with students, I'm working, with my teaching, working with seniors. There's a big emphasis on, for me and the other faculty, on like the content, like what's the work about, what's the work about, what's the work about. And obviously that's like very important, but like you also, I find that they get like they like make it overcomplicated then. And that they need this big thing. And it's like sometimes it could just be, it's something simple. Um, uh, but if it's meaningful to you, and I think Cordy, going back to Cordy's interview, said this, like, other people will find meaning in it, you know?
That reminds me of something that I heard on The Power of Myth that Joseph Campbell said, that we're not really looking for meaning in life. We're actually looking for the experience of being alive.
Hmm. Yeah, that makes perfect sense. Yeah, I like that.
And through art, you really find it through art. It could be anything, It's not about what does it mean, it's what is it doing. How it's done is more important than what it is.
Yeah, yeah.
But it's interesting. I've been thinking of myself as a recovering modernist lately with these enunciation paintings, because there's such a clear narrative. This is something I probably would have been horrified a few years ago, because I was making these minimalist geometric abstraction paintings, and they would take me like a day to make a painting, but it was really about all the preparation, all the stuff that went into it. Like I was doing all
Right.
this, going very intense into meditation and other things just to be in that moment. And I think all stuff that was important in the work I'm doing now. But I like that there's this narrative that people can share in. We love
Hmm.
story. We're a species of we were
Storytellers.
storytellers. Yeah, that's such
Yeah,
an integral part of the human experience.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Oh man, well, Joe, it's been a blast talking. I really appreciate your having this conversation.
You too. I have a question for you. How did you get started with your podcast and interviewing artists?
I felt like it would open up opportunities for talking to people in a way that wouldn't be possible otherwise. And that ended up being true. If I was like, "Hey Joe, can we just sit down and talk for like an hour?" You'd be like, what? Like, why?" But if I say it's for a podcast and other people are going to hear it, etc., it makes it accessible to have these
Yep.
conversations. And I learned so much. It's been such a privilege to get to know the people that I've known just in New York in the art world and also in spiritual communities. I feel like it's a way you can really you can learn a lot.
Yeah, I found with interviewing artists, it was well, even this, right? So we've been talking for, maybe an hour and 15 minutes or so, and it's very personal. Like it's almost like speed dating. Like I feel like know you. We just met, and
Yeah.
I feel like I have a little more of an intimate connection with you, right? Than right, and then if we just would have met some other place, and I found that when I've interviewed artists, uh, yeah, it's nice. It's a privilege to get to talk to someone on a deeper, more intimate level right now, where it's like full concentration. Even though and we're on Zoom, it's like I'm looking right at you. It's even though we're not in person, but it's still um, seems very a good connection. Yeah,
There is a level of trust involved, right? And I think
completely.
There's
Yeah.
there's definitely been people that I didn't know, and thank you for agreeing to this because a lot of
Yeah.
people that I don't know personally. It's interesting how New York and I guess everywhere is still very we're still hardwired to trust people that we know. Like if you send an email or a message on social media to somebody you don't know, there's a good chance they're not going to respond because we're just
Yeah.
inundated with so much information. Maybe I'm a bot, they don't know. But generally you can really connect on a deeper level. And on the people that I did know, I knew much better after the podcast because you have that time and you say at least an hour and
Yep.
you're going to sit there and talk about things. So you want to make it meaningful and you want to make
Yeah.
it worth it.
You know,
And
it's I thought of this so uh with when my interviews, so right, so the interesting thing is a podcast about art, because usually you think it's so visual, and so this is just with just having the audio. um but I always thought of my interviews as kind of like a NPR kind of moment. And then and initially at some point, so I would show up when I do an interview with an artist with just a very small digital recorder, put on the desk and try to, have my questions, but basically try to have a conversation like we're having now, right? On Zoom. Um, and at some point, I remember I thought, oh, maybe I should like, because it's visual, I should bring a video camera in. And I did a few video cameras, but I didn't like it. It had a different, it kind of just changed. It changed, I felt like it just changed the interaction of having someone there like filming.
yeah, it's weird. There was a couple show or a couple like YouTube things, video interviews, and I wasn't really
Yeah.
into it.
This, one of the benefits of Zoom since COVID, I think this format really lends itself.
Just from a pragmatic standpoint, just getting it to work, I think it makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
It opens things up. Technology both constricts and expands our experience, I think.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. Well, thank you so much for asking me to be on, and I appreciate it. I'm glad I got to know you. It was a good conversation.
Same to you. Thanks so much for coming on. I really
All right.
appreciate it.
All
Take
right. Bye.
care.